I know you will love this as well, but he said, when everything is uncertain, everything is possible. And I just love that. And it's one of the key messages whenever we work with business leaders who are scaling up their business, and you don't always know what's coming around the corner, and you certainly don't have the answers to all questions. And it is just quite uplifting to think that whenever you don't know that and you're in that kind of deep, dark valley of uncertainty, that you can do things to shape the outcome, but anything's possible.
Before we begin today's episode, I'd like to express sincere thanks to all of our wonderful guests who shared their time with me and once again provided so much value this season to you, our listeners. I'd also like to thank, importantly, all of you, our listeners, spanning right across the globe. I have an appeal. It's an appeal that I put out there at the end of each season. We continue to keep the podcast sponsor free and produce it at our own cost. So if you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please take 10 seconds now. Yep, right now. To do that, as it really helps the show and the quality of the guests we can continue to attract. And when you find an episode useful, please share it with your friends and your company colleagues, because again, it helps broaden the reach of the podcast. As ever, a huge thanks for all of the really positive feedback and engagement on social media, specifically LinkedIn. And if you're enjoying the podcast, why not subscribe to our ScaleX Insider 321 newsletter at simplescaling.com/newsletter, where each week we provide you with 3 timeless takeaways, 2 inspirational quotes, and 1 reflection question for you to journal on to support your scaling psyche. Also, great news, we're fast approaching our 2nd ScaleX Summit, Ireland's leading summit on all things scaling, on Wednesday, the 13th of November in Belfast, ICC. Once again, we have an incredible lineup of guests on all things scaling. So we have a gift to you, our listeners, of 10% off using the code ScaleX Insider 10. That's 10. ScaleX Insider 10. Now, Rob, a drum roll please, without further ado. Claire, you're very welcome back to the ScaleX Insider podcast. I know I say it every time, but where the hell has that last 3 months gone?
Well, hello, it's great to be back. It's flown.
Oh my goodness, how's your summer been?
It has been absolutely great. The weather hasn't been absolutely great, but having a little bit of downtime over the summer it's always good for the well-being.
Yeah, of course, and you're about to head off to the very sunny Mexico, so I'm just a tad envious.
Yes, that helps.
So tell me, what did you think of season 13, or focus on all things health and well-being of the leader, something very, very close to our heart. So what were your reflections from season 13?
What a wonderful season, and the theme of the season being that around the health and the well-being of the leader, and very specifically focused on that. So I think there was just fantastic information from so many different sources, really about how we can just become more conscious of things if we're going to tap into the holistic magic of life. And I think sometimes whenever we think of health and well-being, it's really easy to jump straight into, what can we eat better? How more do we have to sleep? What more exercise we need to do? And I think what I really picked up was that it can be an awful lot wider than that as well. There's so many things that are playing into our emotional well-being. Dr. Gemma Newman gave the great example of the gentleman she met in A&E who was suffering from consistent headaches. And what sat at the very source of that was the fact that his father had fallen ill, and that was playing on his mind. So whenever we think of health and well-being, one of the biggest takeaways for me was that it can be so much more holistic and wider than what we typically tend to think about. And I think also one of the key messages for me is that there can be a very long list of things that we feel obligated to do. and that we're told that we know that leads to great health and well-being. But again, one of the greatest learnings from this season was that it's up to us to create our own formula that works for our own well-being and our own self-care. So there's certain things that might not work for everybody, and actually experimenting with these things to, I guess at its very essence, what makes you feel better? What can you try that actually either lifts your energy or makes you feel that little bit better? Over the summer is a lovely time to, I personally get a little bit more flexibility in my diary. And a simple little thing like taking 15 minutes to go outside and have my coffee, just me and the birds. And it's just beautiful. And it's just, I sit in silence and I don't think of anything else. And maybe some might call that meditation, but that's something that really has worked for me over the past couple of months. And it's just little things. I know you love to exercise in the morning, but it's what are those little things that you can bring together to create your own formula for self-care. And that spoke really loudly to me.
What are some of the non-negotiables for you in your formula for well-being? You mentioned that little coffee break outside in nature with the birds. What else?
Goodness me. Well, mine's changing a little bit at the moment. And I had a really interesting conversation. I have a coach. And at the end of our last session together, she said to me, right, Claire, let's sit down and let's set goals for the next 6 months. And I thought about it and I said, well, actually, I want to do something slightly different because I want my focus over the next 6 months to be on me. I'm going to be my priority. And I still feel a little bit uncomfortable saying that out loud. And I suspect it's quite typical, maybe more so with women. And we have this, I don't know, somewhere along the line, we let ourselves maybe slip down our own priority lists. The kids come along, we're kind of juggling things. I'm not saying men don't juggle things too. But somewhere along the line, I think maybe personally, I've fallen down my priority list. So mine's changing a little bit. My non-negotiables are changing. I'm at a transitional period right now, and I have to call her out for this. With the love, with the fantastic support of your lovely wife, who I know you mentioned during the season has retrained as a nutritionist and a health practitioner, and she is really helping me to, I guess, identify what those non-negotiables are and actually make those a priority to allow me to bring myself back up my priority list. So I'll come back to you. Maybe ask me that at the end of the next season and I'll be a little bit clearer.
Good on you. I know we were speaking before we came on air about your weekly cold water swims with your wonderful friends, collectively known as the Bob Chats. Tell me a
Yes,
little bit more about that.
I have to give them all a shout out. These are some of my oldest friends. Every Sunday morning, we get together and we drive about half an hour. The drive is actually probably quite prominent. We drive about half an hour and I guess there's no subject left, no subject off the radar. And we have a good laugh. I said to you before we started, there's sometimes I actually almost have to pull the car over because I'm laughing so hard. But we get together, there's 7 of us, and we go for a swim or a dip or a bob, actually, in line with our name, the Bob Chats. We don't really do much swimming at all, but we go into the cold water. We've been doing it for 2 years now, and we do it all year round. But that is just total food for my soul. It's, I don't know, it just kind of, it's quite cleansing, and it's just a complete and utter reset for me. And I'm going to use a quote that Chip Conley used, and he said, whenever we get older, our operating system shifts from our ego to our soul. And he actually also said, and we learn to dance with our emotions. And that to me is totally, it's just so fulfilling. I get to spend time with my great friends. We offer support with each other. We laugh until we cry. And we also get that great hit from all those the hormone hit from the cold water. And it's a lovely reset. So maybe that's one of my non-negotiables. I've been doing it for 2 years. That's not likely to change, and I would be very disappointed and saddened if it ever did.
I'm just making a note because there's a lot just in that morning of going for your cold water swim and coming back, what I'm hearing is the power of great friends, the fact that all of your friends hold space for each other in whatever has to be discussed, the ups, the downs. You're getting the huge dopamine hit from the cold water. And we had the wonderful, wonderful Wim Hof on the show this season to close the season. What an incredible man who talks at length about the physiological benefits of cold water swimming. But the way you have packaged that's not just going out into your garden and having a cold dip. You make a celebration of it, you make a morning of it, and it just sounds so wholesome. Dr. Jonathan Fisher, the cardiologist, spoke about the importance of wholeness, leveraging wholeness within our heart. I suspect when you're coming back into your family at the end of a Sunday morning after you've been away, that you feel incredibly whole.
100%. It actually gives me everything. It gives me everything that I need for my own personal well-being from all those sources that so many of the guests talked about. Was it Dr. Jonathan Fisher spoke very beautifully about his sister who had passed away, and he talked about her values of joy, compassion, kindness, and celebration. And all of those values are very much present in that morning. Maybe I don't call them that, but they're definitely there. And my friends equally, they feel what I feel as well. I think sometimes we actually talk. I know you and I had watched or read the book Around the Blue Zones. And one of the key things that really struck me about the blue zones was the whole concept of loneliness and how people who live in these blue zones spend time together, and community really sits at the source of that. And we often joke, although I think the joke started to become a little bit more real, of creating a retirement village where you go into the retirement village at the age of 70. I have some friends who are actually living on their own, and actually I don't want to see people grow old alone. So having that sense of community where we could continue to maintain what we have on a Sunday morning in a retirement village it might sound a little bit weird, but why not?
Well, I'm smiling because Colin often appeals to me. He said, "Would you get together with your wealthy investor friends and create a retirement village where we can do the cold water dips? We can have our yoga, we can have our coffee or shakes, coming together, play music." So
Yeah, why not?
it's got to be there, folks. If anyone's doing this, let us know, because there's definitely an appetite out there for a bespoke retirement village, especially after Chip Connolly give us great comfort that in terms of happiness, the ages between, I think, 47 and 49 are when people are at their least happy, and then they start to come back off the bottom of this U curve again, building back up. So Claire, we're coming into a wonderful decade. So brilliant.
We're just getting started.
Let's go. So I know the overarching theme was health and well-being, but were there any underlying themes that emerged for you from the season beyond your reflections?
There were absolutely just a couple of things I want to point out. I think before we go into the themes is just I was delighted about the fact that you got to have a great conversation with your own hero, because I know Wim Hof has played such a significant part in your life and your journey. So that was just a pleasure to listen to. And also, I just want to call out, I know that conversation potentially could have been quite challenging for you with Dr. Jonathan Fisher. And I think that what you shared with him is so helpful for so many people listening who may be leading without having being more cognizant of all of that emotional, what did he talk about, the heart makers, those positive heart emotions. So
Yeah,
thank
it's
you for,
heartbreakers and heartwakers, and unfortunately, I hadn't been listening to some of the signs from the heartbreakers, but there we
yes.
go.
I think you also got quite excited about the conversation with Brian Keane around psychedelics. So I think I have to keep an eye on you. So yes, into the themes. So yeah, what came out of the last season? I was actually recapping in the last season, and what came through really prominently in season 12 was the whole concept of servant leadership, collaboration, and authenticity. And in this season, as you say, the umbrella theme was around health and well-being, but I kind of picked out three things that I felt were these messages were recurring. One was, again, how all around the diverse sources of energy that exist out there. And I think that was really refreshing. Um, I think as well, another theme that was coming through was around how acting in line with our values was one of our greatest sources of well-being. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in depth. But as well, the third thing that really stood out for me was the importance of self-reflection. Or again, as Chip Conley really beautifully put this, he said, our ability to metabolize our life experiences. And that is really taking the time to think about when something happens to us, maybe of significance, or maybe not even that significant, but some learning that we take, and how that, what is that telling us, and what are we learning a little bit about ourselves through the process. So that whole concept of self-reflection came through quite loud and clear.
Those are really
So
profound. Diverse sources of energy act in line with our values and the importance of self-reflection. In the context of self-reflection, have you continued with your journaling, one of your commitments from one of our past seasons?
I didn't, but I made the very conscious decision not to. It wasn't something that I just gave up on, but I guess it was something that I was committing my time to. But um, I do a lot of reflecting. I'm a natural reflector, and I actually felt that the process of doing the journaling wasn't really adding much to me. But I do an awful lot of reflecting.
What does that
So
look like? How practically, what do you do? Do you, when you're sitting out with your coffee, is that a time of reflection? When you, with your coach, are you self-reflecting? How practically do you do that?
the reflecting over the last couple of months has been lovely, sitting out in the garden with my coffee in the morning. That's been great, and it has added a lot of value to me. But my time for reflecting that I've probably done for years has been when I'm in the car. And part of my role, my day-to-day work takes me all over the country. And I could be sometimes driving for 2, 3 hours. And that is just a lovely time to reflect. And sometimes I'll actually think, well, I'll think about that a little bit more. And I've done this for years. Whenever I met you, my journey to the office took about an hour and 15, an hour and 30 minutes just one way. And that I would have saved topics up to think my way through and thought of them from all different angles. And actually, by the time I got down to the offices, I had worked out the best course of action. And a lot of people ask me day in, day out, what about that journey? Is that not really difficult? And yes, it impacted other things, but it added more value to me in terms of giving me that space to reflect than it took away. So that is when I do my greatest reflecting. So I think back to your question around the journaling, I did make a conscious decision. It wasn't something that fell away, but I do a lot of that anyway.
That's what I love about you and these conversations, because you've held a mirror to me. I traveled to Belfast for quite a number of years as a young accountant, and I really, I, I was frustrated and irritated at the length of that journey. There was a period where I was traveling with a friend, and it was great fun. It was really, really good fun. I really enjoyed that. But then when I started traveling on my own, he moved jobs. I started traveling on my own. This is before podcasts, and so you had the breakfast news, and you couldn't consume the value that we can now. But certainly within for journeys now, I love consuming podcasts, filling my head with new ideas, with different perspectives, with great conversations. But I love the fact that you just love that time in the car to self-reflect and not kind of do the typical type A thing of, oh, right, I've got an hour here. How am I going to fill that to be more effective, to be more efficient? You simply take the time of, no, this is my time and I'm going to self-reflect.
I find that we often talk about energy sources, and one of my greatest energy sources is that drive. And sometimes I crank my music up, sing really badly for about an hour, and I am out just bounding with energy. So I know you and I use that kind of travel time quite differently. And sometimes I urge you, you urge me to listen to podcasts, but I urge you to listen to your favorite music. Uh, and sometimes, there's a good place for both. But that is good reflection time. I find some of my best ideas come in that time. And then sometimes as well, I just want to clear my head because that's the
Brilliant.
most important thing I can do.
Brilliant. There was lots came up this season. So were there any specific messages that captured your curiosity? Anything that stood out? Any new lenses by which you will see things? Any new frames? Can you
Yeah.
share with our listeners anything that jumped out for you?
Well, if I dive into the diverse energy sources, first of all, um, there was a number of different guests that you spoke to. I really just shone a light on what some of those sources are. And Dr. Gemma Newman, she very much focused on how our emotional world can feed into our physical world, our physical well-being. And she talked about happiness, she talked about humor, she talked about always having that positive mindset. And I thought that just that great example, again, as I mentioned earlier on about the gentleman in A&E who suffered with the headaches, but he was carrying a lot of emotional stress since his father became ill. So I thought that was, again, we can overlook that and think that our health and well-being is maybe just linked to the practical things that we know that we need to do, that we're told often that we need to do. Brian Keane, I loved his
Before we go on to Brian, I loved Gemma's framework. I loved her loves framework.
gloves. Yes,
Gratitude, love, outside, veggies, exercise, sleep. What a wonderful framework. And it was really interesting for me that a medical doctor was putting gratitude and love and outside, within a framework. There's nothing within there that is medicine related. It's
exactly.
it's all everything that she said is giving us, encouraging us to take agency over our own health and well-being, to look for moments of gratitude at every point in the day, to lead with love. And this came up time and time and time again. And we look at some of the wonderful guests that have guested on ScaleX Insider who have scaled multi-billion-dollar organizations, the likes of Bob Chapman, the likes of Jason Lippert, and they're appealing to us to lead with love. This isn't some kind of trite, cliche, Pollyanna kind of notion that, oh yes, but this approach, this frame by which we can lead, actually leads to significant scaling success. And the fact that you've got all of these different perspectives, a cardiologist, a medical doctor, uh, Bob Chapman, whose background is in finance, who are all coming together to say, take this approach. I feel it's time that we all stand up and listen, because there's efficacy in this.
I wholeheartedly agree because whenever you're hearing it from the people, we had a brief conversation before we started speaking, but whenever you hear it from the likes of a cardiologist who sees that big muscle beating, sometimes not beating, in people's bodies and is actually studying everything. Like the fact that Dr. Jonathan Fisher talked about how an artery, the heart has wisdom, and an artery can detect whenever it needs to step up and act whenever there's a weakness there going on in the heart. These are people who go into this field, like Dr. Gemma Newman, with a science mindset because they are interested in medicine and the body and the anatomy, but actually they have evolved their message for the benefit of others because they see the contributors to poor health and poor well-being and poor heart health, and actually are now getting to the very source and communicating this message to all of us, to business leaders and way beyond. And I absolutely think we have to listen to that.
Well, you're living it.
With
You're
love.
you're you're living it. I interjected. You were going on to speak about
Right.
Brian Keane and his message.
I absolutely loved his openness, loved his vulnerability. I love the fact that he's very willing to share his story, but he very much talked about his energy coming from people and his environment. And I guess I really got that because I think most of my energy comes from people. That's kind of like plugging me in as well. But as well, it was reinforced by Molly Eastman. And she talked about our environment is more crucial than we think, given that we spend 93% indoors. So Jonathan Fisher again, he went back, he talked about gratitude and love, everything that you've mentioned there, laughter. Chip Connolly, I've got my list in front of me here. Chip Connolly talked about curiosity and being open to experiences and how they correlate to living a longer and happier life. Jeff Reesley talked about the importance of safety and security and creating boundaries and even rest and recovery, and how we very often sometimes work flat out for 11 months of the year and then take 1 month off for holiday. One of the key messages that I really took away was the fact that we should be building in a significant amount of rest and recovery within a 24-hour period before we go again. He had a lovely little formula in there for that as well, in terms of high performance. So Simon Alexander Ong really highlighted the importance of community, back to our retirement village, but our relationship with ourselves and others and our ability to build those healthy connections. Again, it was another source of health and well-being. So this really broadened my mind, and the diversity of the sources, particularly around well-being and even energy, really stood out to me.
Brilliant. Any other messages that align to the theme about acting in congruence with your values?
Yeah. Again, quoting some of your guests, Brian Keane talked about sometimes whenever we feel that lack of motivation, it can be because we're misaligned with our values. And again, probably more so acting in line with your values, giving you that source of energy. Gemma Newman talked about, we've had these discussions on previous wrap-ups before about becoming clear on your personal values, but it was really the fact that this season shone a light on it being a source of well-being was slightly different, but again goes back to that very our own ability to start to define what those are and identifying the things that are important to us, and if we act in line with those values, how we get that sense of fulfillment, of meaning, of doing, I guess, um, uh, uh, investing our time in what is going to what's important to us. So lots of that. Sorry, Lauren Hodges as well. She talked about when we act with clarity and alignment with our personal values, we create less stress and more calm. And you called it out, actually. You talked about how um, Jonathan Fisher talked about steadiness. And whenever you went into those meetings in a previous life, you know, the amount of decisions that potentially had been made from a position of stress and not calm, and how the company could have saved millions of pounds or dollars on being able to get your physiology into a place of calm before going into those rooms and potentially making decisions. So
Yeah, I think a lot of the time people make decisions from a place of fear as well, rather than a place of love, just as to bring back in what we had been speaking about at the outset. And I hadn't considered this before, but I feel that, and it probably comes from the way we're wired. We're wired for safety, not success. I've interviewed lots of neurosurgeons, neuroscientists, psychologists on the show at this stage, and the understanding is that our primary default position is one where we're wired for safety, not necessarily success. And it's understanding that when we create a vision for the future and lean into that vision for the future, if we can lean in with faith and love and not fear, I feel our decisions will be very, very different.
yeah. I think Dr. Jonathan Fisher as well called out the fact that if we operate from a place of fear, that we activate the heart in an unhealthy way. Whereas if we work to operate from a basis of faith and love, we get to activate those positive heart emotions, which are better for ourselves. Actually, not just ourselves, but so much better for the people around us.
There's no question. Anything else before I really dive in to understand if there's anything now you're going to do differently in the context of your health and well-being?
Yeah, just to touch on that importance of self-reflection. A couple of your guests kept going back to that and making sure that we're tuning into those experiences that we have in life. Really thinking about them, I guess, and thinking about what we learn from those, and what potentially that's telling us about ourselves, so that we can understand ourselves a little bit better. Or if faced with situations like that, what would we do differently to potentially change the outcome the next time round? But Simon Alexander Ong, I loved what he talked about. The longest journey we make as humans are the inches we make from our heads to our hearts, and makes the point that our challenges, our setbacks, our trauma can sometimes awaken something inside of us. And we spend so much time avoiding them as opposed to facing them and really trying to understand them, because sometimes that they can sit at our core and they can really drive us, good or bad.
Yeah, you mentioned at the outset before we came on air that for many people, their mess becomes their message. Brian Keane had called that out,
Yeah.
and Brian has been a source of support to many. He has an incredible podcast, the Brian Keane podcast. I encourage people to listen to Brian's podcast. He's a guru in all things health and well-being. Very, very knowledgeable guy. Your mess becoming your message, and something that came through in relation to the themes for me was the fact that as I reflect on all of the guests this season, they've all experienced trauma in some fashion, some degree. If you think of Wim Hof losing his wife to suicide, Wim unemployed, uneducated, and he is, a global superstar, a celebrity, not something that he craves, but he uses the celebrity status to really drive home his message and his purpose of making the world happy, healthy, and strong. Brian Keane, again, was very vulnerable in sharing his trauma. Dr. Jonathan Fisher, very vulnerable in sharing his trauma around his burnout as a result of overwork, his desire to meet an identity that had been created for him in many respects, the paradigm that he had to live up to, one created by his parents, his home, his school, the pressure of achievement that he felt. John Assaraf, similarly so. Simon, you mentioned. Chip Connolly, Jeff Risley, who again had a breakdown. All of these people have leveraged their trauma to really do something great in the world.
I agree. And instead of maybe brushing it under the carpet or pretending it didn't happen, or I guess not taking that time to reflect on what did happen and what you've learned about yourself. How have you come out of that? How are you stronger? How are you better as a result of that? And there's something that always sticks in my head when we talk about that, because it can, and again, I love Dr. Jonathan Fisher. He described, in detail about how his trauma just totally floored him. And it's small little steps of action to get us out of that trauma, will start to give us the confidence. You often say confidence needs evidence. And to allow us to build that confidence just requires us to take small steps to take us to move past that, but not ignore it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the statistic is a plane when it takes off is off course 98% of that journey. It's that constant just course correction, those little nudges to keep it on path. Nothing seismic. All these little nudges that are instructed by the pilot just to keep it on course. And it's the compounding effect of the very, very smallest action, like deciding that tomorrow, rather than having my coffee at my desk, I'm going to actually take it outside, and I'm going to sit
Yes.
outside just with my coffee and reflect for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Ultimately, this comes back to awareness. Awareness precedes understanding. Understanding precedes change. So the self-reflection will help create a level of awareness that hopefully gives that understanding, which will hopefully lead to change that puts you back in the trajectory towards your scaling ambition. So on that note, in the context of awareness preceding understanding, preceding change, what, as a result of listening to this season, Claire, do you feel you're going to do differently, if anything? Maybe you've got it all sussed.
I wish. So just to recap on my commitments from the last season, first of all, I set about creating a short affirmation. I was inspired by Sean Swarner and his story, where he was diagnosed with stage 4 lymphoma, and he did everything to work on his mindset, and he created a little affirmation that really helped him to tap into his subconscious, and he used it whenever he was going up and down his stairs at home. He had 14 steps, and I did that myself. So yeah, that's I'm doing that at the moment, and I'm trying to. Sometimes I forget. I won't lie, but I'm trying to tell myself that little affirmation, because I do believe in the power of subconscious whenever we're trying to, I guess, change for the better. Um, I also was really inspired by Russ Laraway at the end of last season, and he talked about he gave a lovely framework around giving feedback around 5 continues and 1 improvement. And I guess over the last couple of months, I've made an effort to meet with all of our team members to have coffee and lunch, and I haven't implemented a structure for frame or feedback yet. But it's just been really nice reconnecting with the team to learn a little bit more about, I guess, what's important to people within the team as well, because we're all home based. It can be very easy to lose that connection. So I am still working at that. I won't put that one down as complete just yet. So this time, going back to, I guess, what I said at the outset, I am my priority, and I have to learn to say that comfortably out loud. It does still challenge me, but I'm learning some new habits. I'm actually loving getting back into the way of I just doing the things that make me feel good, around what I'm eating, around getting enough sleep, falling back in love with exercise, just loving that at the moment as well. So I have your lovely wife, Colleen. I'm going to give her a plug here. If anybody wants to follow her on Instagram, it's C McGurgan Nutrition. I hope you don't mind me doing that, but she's been superb and been really good help for me. So I'm loving that. And one other commitment as well I'm going to make, and something I guess I would urge all listeners to do. And I'm going to ask myself, and I would encourage other people to do it as well, but are the initiatives that we're implementing around health and well-being really helping? Or are they unnecessary investments that maybe delude us into thinking that the health and well-being box is being ticked? And I'm talking about things that we feel that we almost must implement in the workplace, like the free gym passes or like the yoga sessions. And are they addressing the real barriers that can stand in the way of us feeling well within the workplace? So, or do we need to look closer at the things that we do to create or potentially that are adding to people's stress in the workplace? So I guess what I'm going to do is I'm going to commit to running a little survey, and we will do things around health and well-being as well. But are we causing any unnecessary stress that we can change quite easily to people within the workplace? Because it's not about, I guess, putting plasters over things. It's about getting the real source of that. So this season has really inspired me to look at that.
Brilliant. I feel I feel you're challenging me here to stop sending WhatsApp messages into the Teams channel at the weekends whenever I'm out on the bike and a thought of a new idea comes to my head.
You've got much better, as you said to me. I'm not sure whether everybody knows this, but you can set up a little WhatsApp channel to yourself. And as you said before, you said
It's
yours is
full.
very busy.
My own WhatsApp channel is full, and then I reflect on it again on a Monday after the weekend and all of these ideas. And go, yeah, probably. I will not do that. I'll not send that into the group.
You're much better. You're getting much better.
Thank you. I'm working on it. It's the awareness is key, you see.
Indeed.
So tell me, as we come into the close, what were your three favorite takeaways this season?
Brilliant. Okay, my first one was Simon Alexander Ong. And I know you will love this as well, but he said, when everything is uncertain, everything is possible. And I just loved that. And it's one of the key messages whenever we work with business leaders who are scaling up their business, and you don't always know what's coming around the corner, and you certainly don't have the answers to all questions. And it is just quite uplifting to think that whenever you don't know that and you're in that kind of deep, dark valley of uncertainty, that you can do things to shape the outcome, but anything's possible. So really loved that one from Simon. So thanks for that. Second one then was from Brian Keane. One of my favorites. He said, just when the caterpillar thought it was the end of the world, the butterfly knew it was the beginning. I think that's a really important one to remember as well, because we all go through tough times. And, sometimes when we don't see the easiest way to change things or the easiest way out, and, it's a transition period. And he called that out really nicely. So I loved that. Loved that takeaway. And my third, my all-time favorite is Dr. Jonathan Fisher. And this is going to ring in my head, but lead with love. Live and lead with a warm heart. He used the words continuously: empathy, compassion, kindness, love, but also to ourselves. He said, tune into your inner voice and check how you're speaking to yourself, but equally so, we've all got a responsibility to lead other people. So lead with love. Yeah, love that.
Well, you do that, and I want to acknowledge you for certainly leading and living with lots of love and brilliant energy. You always lift the frequency, whatever room you go into, and I don't know if you fully appreciate that, but it's a superpower that you have, and may it long continue. May you continue to burn bright. It's
Thank
been
you.
an incredible conversation as ever. Love the wrap up.
I loved it too.
Have
Brilliant.
a
Thank you for that great season.
You're very, very welcome. Thank my guests. They've been wonderful once again. And as I said at the outset, anyone who's listening who's got value from this today, please like, subscribe, and share this with your friends and your colleagues. Claire,
Brilliant.
as ever, thank you for your time and your incredible energy today. I really,
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it. In the
Loved
meantime,
it.
you have a great holiday. Take care.
Thank you.